Hi, I'm Linda Cummings with CK Associates. This is for Kayla. You mentioned that there were no direct effects measured for the Gulf sturgeon, but that you saw some indication of physiological effects. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, on what effects you actually saw?
Sure, and to review, we're talking about what effects were measured for Gulf sturgeon after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And it is all summarized in a published report and within the PDARC also. But physiological changes that were revealed were DNA fragmentation and effects to reproduction, and that was all through physiological testing. I can't go into, I wasn't a part of all the analysis of that part, more of the field side and collecting of it, but in review of the report, it was all outlined and detailed in it. Thank you.
Dr. Hernandez, the enhanced toxicity of the oil when the dispersant is mixed in with it, is that, do you think that's more a result of the toxicity of the dispersant itself, or because of the increased contact of the oil caused by the dispersant thinning the oil, or do you have any information on that?
Okay, so the question is related to the toxicological impacts of oil versus dispersant, and what's the mechanism for the oil and the dispersant being more toxic in some cases. There's a lot, so again, I was trying to collate a bunch. There's a lot of studies I didn't focus on, and so I think each author went through and proposed based on what impacts they saw physiologically or you know, developmentally, what they thought that mechanism may have been. But generally the treatments would cover oil and then dispersant alone and oil plus dispersant. And so it could be either, I would say. I mean, the dispersant seems to be toxic in and of itself in some instances. But then with the oil, I mean, it could just be, in some cases, the straw that tips them over. Like the oil is not great, but then oil plus dispersant is another level of toxicity. One thing we don't know in a lot of our studies, I think, are the interactive effects of a lot of things. And so that's a possibility. Or as you said, the dispersant is doing its job, making the oil smaller, but maybe that allows for pathways into the bodies of these organisms where otherwise they wouldn't be able to, I guess, invade, do like the gills of a fish or something like that as easily. So I think it would be very study specific, and I would leave that to the authors of each study to look at that. We did one study with sargassum, which is a habitat for a lot of planktonic. There's a lot of early life stages lives there. And we saw that the addition of oil kind of obviously didn't do great, but when you added the dispersant, the sargassum tended to sink. So we think it may have something to do with the permeability of those little gas bladders and allowed the sargassum to just sink. That may be a good thing. Maybe you don't want oiled habitat at the surface. Maybe you want to just get rid of it. So we didn't judge it one way or the other, but that was an effect we noticed. So there could be any number of mechanisms, I would say.
And for Patrick, I'm not sure this word might be enjoyed your talk on the foraminifera, but you mentioned, you know, looking past at the ichthyo spill as well as Deepwater Horizon. Are you or your colleagues or a similar effort being done on the ongoing Taylor energy spill, which is, you know, of some magnitude as well?
Yeah, so the question is about any sort of benthic surveys of the Taylor spill. As of right now, I am not involved in it. You know, some of the standard, yeah, it's a pretty contentious issue right now, so I have to be careful what I say. The Natural Resource Damage Assessment Group is currently working on it. They're including some benthic myofauna and macrofauna in those. The issue is that there were no samples taken prior to the slump, which ultimately caused the spill. And that also caused the sediments to be moved around quite a bit. And so what is at the surface of those sediments may not be fully representative of what would naturally be there anyway. So it's a difficult, scenario. But as of right now, there are preliminary surveys, sediment surveys that include some of those groups. But forams are not explicitly one of them. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, this is for Patrick also. When you had your core sample showing up there, and you described the top layer as a marine snow, oil snow, did it encompass the dispersants with that?
So there have been 2 studies in the deep sea, and when I say deep sea, more than about 400 meters depth, that have documented increased DOS compounds, which is one of the compounds that's measurable in sediments of the dispersant. And they were on the order of like anywhere between twice and 10 times the background levels. We haven't gotten into the toxicology of that on benthic communities yet. That just hasn't been done. That needs to be done in an experimental setting, and it's difficult to ascertain the relative toxicology of the dispersant versus oil versus oxygen stress. So
It all works together.
right.
I think I'm loud enough about this too. Don't yell at anybody. So James, that specific instance you were talking about with the brines release, that must have been extremely hypersaline water, right?
The question was, they were asking about the example I showed of the legacy brine release. You're talking about the one that had been there for like 50 years?
Yeah.
That was, as best we could tell from the historical records, it was some extremely saline brine, but it was also several releases over a period of time. So it built up in the soils to extremely high levels.
And does that monitor the soil salinities to see how long it will last?
We're not currently monitoring those levels. It's just there. We know that it's not spreading, so that's not a concern for us right now. But it's been there for 50 years. Unless we're willing to go in and do something extremely drastic like soil removal, that's probably what it's going to be for the next 50 years.
Can I ask one more question? I think you can hear me. I'm pretty loud. Can you all hear me? Yes. So, to the Chandler Islands and the oil spill, how are the mangroves and the seagrass beds now after this spill?
The mangroves were eliminated from some areas. They're starting to come back now. The seagrass beds did fairly well since they were on the back side of the islands. Most of the impacts were from the front side, but there were some on the back. Most of the areas where the mangroves were eliminated came back in Spartina grasses, but there are some mangroves beginning to regenerate in those areas.
Thanks.
Kayla, you said one of the threats to sturgeons, or on your slide, was overfishing. Was that in the past, or is there actually a fishery that goes after sturgeon? And would you eat those?
No, you're correct. This is pre-listed as threatened, that overfishing for Gulf sturgeon was one of their threats and may have been a factor that reduced their numbers in the past. Obviously now, since they're listed, it's frowned upon and illegal to harvest them or in any way. But yeah, that was definitely one of their threats in the beginning, which resulted in their listing as threatened. And they fish them for eating, and they are and their caviar or their roe, their eggs, and yeah, so they are tasty, and apparently their caviar is as well.
Other questions from people in the room? We had a question from registration. Folks wanting to know about what kinds of ways are you all using to transfer the knowledge learned in the event, I guess oil spill events, to the classroom and through community outreach? Or what strategies might you see being possible?
So what is through what, through classrooms? And
Yeah, what sort of mechanisms are you using or are you maybe thinking about doing to get this kind of information like you're sharing here today to the community and into people's classrooms?
I mean, I can speak for myself. I mean, at our institution, there's a very active marine education program. They're often touring through our building, through my lab. So we do those types of exercises. They engage us at Gulf Coast Research Lab to help them develop content for their different classes. It's really project specific. Some agencies really have a big, Garmin was very supportive of outreach and education. That was a major component. Other agencies, depending on the grant source and the mandate they had very little of that. It was more related to the management and resource managers versus public education and such. So it's grant specific, I would say, and also to the extent that we may engage in social media and other things. But it's kind of up to, at least in my case, we keep an active social media presence and website and all that stuff. But I don't have anything really formal personally, other than through our Marine Education Center.
Gomery's given us a really good chance for our science to be sort of in the news or relevant to folks that are watching the news. And so over the years we've been heavily involved with programs called Teacher at Sea, where we bring local school teachers from the St. Pete, Tampa area on board our research vessel with us, and then they typically will broadcast live back to their classroom. And they'll also bring videos and photos and information back to their classroom with them, and other teachers at that school. We've participated in Skype a Scientist, which is I think 2 or 3 years old now, or at least from my knowledge. And that you can broadcast from your lab to a classroom directly anywhere through via Skype. So that's that program. I'm trying to think of other outreach. I mean, we're pretty active in like local science events, festivals in St. Pete and Tampa area. I'm trying to think. Yeah, there's been a lot of outreach through Gomery-funded research. It's given us a really good chance to get the word out.
The opposite side of that is that the reality of it is that most information is gathered on releases or spills from the people that are actually working it, unless it's folks that are in academia or in some of the agencies that put out reports and stuff. Most of the information that's gathered is never transferred because there's no formal mechanism to do that. There are probably a number of people in this room that have responded to various spills over the years, different releases, and even if you're with agencies and stuff, and before I retired, I spent almost 30 years responding to releases and spills with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Gained a tremendous amount of knowledge, and others in this room have done the same. That knowledge is never transferred. You take it with you to the next spill and you use it on that, and you transfer it to people that are there with you. You exchange ideas and exchange things, but for the most part, a lot of the information that's gathered is never transferred.
Well, we're so happy that you transferred some of your knowledge to us here today.
But that's what makes things like these seminars extremely important, because it at least makes people aware of, hey, there's more information out there. How do I get a hold of that?
Well, now that we know that you're retired, I think everyone knows who to contact here. But with that, I'd like to thank all of our guest speakers again for doing a fabulous job this morning on their presentations and a great job during the panel. And thank you.